Are you tired of struggling to keep up with the daily tasks of running your nephrology medical practice? Can your practice benefit from the added expertise and experience of a team of professionals that are not only knowledgeable in their given field, but know nephrology like no other in the industry? Well, then stay tuned right here for our online podcast, Nephrology Today. Welcome to Nephrology Today, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and discussions in the world of kidney care. I'm Michelle, and today we're speaking once again with Dr. Andrew Kowalski. And today we'll be discussing the topic of obesity and its effects on CKD. And we're so excited to be talking to our resident healthy eating and lifestyle expert today on what preventions that you can take to kind of offset obesity and really help dive into the topic of healthy eating and habits. So, Dr. Kowalski, you know the 4-part series that Dr. Menev and Dr. Udani did on obesity in the TRIUMPH study, and we'd love to get your perspective and thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as always, thank you for having me. This is a great series that you guys put together, and I think it offers a lot of information for patients. I thought, the podcast by Dr. Udani and Dr. Menev was fantastic. I mean, they covered so much information from, how obesity can actually cause kidney disease. They talked about some of the limitations of our current medical system and how obesity is kind of frowned upon and still is stigmatized in an unfair way. Instead of treating it like a disease that it actually is, as many patients, can do everything that's written in the book and still, not achieve the goal weight or look that they want, because there's more behind the scenes. It's not just you eat too much. Your body's going through reactions and after reactions, and that's what's holding you back. And especially the important part was tapping on transplant and how many transplant facilities would prefer to have someone a little bit smaller to have a transplant. And I'm not sure how, as was mentioned in the podcast, how appropriate that is for patients. I mean, we all know that transplant is a life-saving it's a life-saving treatment, and to withhold that from somebody because their BMI, which, as was pointed out in the last podcast, is a pretty awful marker, but it's one that we've used forever. And I guess it goes back to the old saying, if it's not broke, why fix it? But the thing is, it is broke, and we now know there's a laundry list of limitations with it. But just because somebody crosses that line, it's like, sorry, we can't have a transplant, and I think that's unfair. So I think they hit a lot of pain points that are out there in medicine, and a lot of things that we as physicians should look into and be more vocal about, and try to talk to our patients, try to help them along as much as possible, and see if we can change the culture. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's about changing the culture. And same thing with obesity. Obesity is a disease. It's one of the more prevalent diseases that are out there. Most people don't consider it that, but it is. A disease by definition is a change in your physiology, regardless of what initiates it, but it creates a certain outcome. And that's what was wonderfully presented in that podcast when Dr. Menev started mentioning how the fat actually produces these inflammatory markers, and it changes the way the kidney function. It causes the kidney to work harder, and therefore the kidney starts developing scar tissue. And, that's a disease state. So it's more than just, I had too many, French fries one day. No, it's not that. There's more behind it. The talk was about, TRIUMPH study, and TRIUMPH study was actually really neat, because when we're looking at what are some of the ways that we can attack obesity, I feel that there's a couple of different ways. There's ways to attack it before it happens. There's ways to attack it when it's there. And there's ways to attack it when the patient has put their efforts forward and still not seeing results. And now we have things to fall back on, which is what the TRIUMPH study showed. And it was wonderful. I mean, it definitely had, really positive outcomes. So I'm actually excited to see where it goes further and how people respond to this drug moving forward too. So if we're going to talk about obesity, let's talk about it from the the beginning part of it. So obviously, no one wakes up one day and decides that, oh, I'm going to be obese all of a sudden. That's it's not realistic, and nor do I think anyone wants to be that way. So first things first, and Dr. Udani did mention a lot of difficulties too. It's easy to say, go ahead and diet and exercise. The problem with that statement is, well, what do you do? And I'm guilty of this too. And I remember when I was in the beginning of well, not in my training, but in the beginning of, finishing my fellowship. And that was always my line at the very end, when the patient always asked, hey, what else can I do? It was always, oh, make sure, you diet and exercise, eat clean. And I remember one day I was driving home and it just bothered me. I'd said it to this one patient. She was doing everything right. She was on the right medications and all of that. And she just wanted to know what else can she do. And, I said my little catchphrase, as I said many times before. And I'm driving home and I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm supposed to be the expert at this. So that set me down a couple of different rabbit holes, and it made me want to learn a little bit more about, well, what is diet and exercise? Like, what should we be doing? Is there a good diet? Is there a bad diet? Are there good exercises? Are there bad exercises? I mean, the answer is yes to all of the above. So now I think it's important to kind of narrow down and really bring the info out there. You jump on the internet, and the problem with the internet, as awesome as it is in many respects, is that it recycles information. Much of the information is wrong, it gets recycled. Much of the information is outdated and is recycled. And it almost takes someone with an advanced degree to try to figure out what's recycled and what's nonsense versus what's legitimate and what is the appropriate, I guess, action. So in case of obesity, what's the advice that's garbage and what's the advice that's worth looking into? And that's where I'm hoping to come in with my patients, trying to filter out all that nonsense and bring home a very simplistic approach to obesity. So for starters, when I have patients that ask about what else can I do, so diet and exercise, but I take it a step further. So what is diet and exercise? Well, let's talk about diet first. Um, Basically, what the best way to explain it is try to eat as clean as you can. And now this is where the difficulties come into, because, what does that mean? Does that mean, not adding salt, not adding seasoning, whatever? What eating clean means is to try to eat foods or purchase foods that are in the periphery of a grocery store. So anything in the middle is highly processed. And we have very good evidence that shows that consuming highly processed foods will trigger your immune system and then will trigger fat formation. So problems with that is, well, where do you go shopping? Luckily, there's many grocery stores out there that are reasonably priced, and there's some that are not. And I think patients should go after what they can. If you're able to purchase at some of these, higher price stores, go for it. If it makes you feel better, go for it. I think clean food is clean food. If it doesn't have any additives and it doesn't sit on a shelf for 3 weeks and doesn't rot, like, that's bad. Like, you want clean food that is as natural as possible to its original state. And then you take that food and you make something out of it. You can create a stir fry, you can create a dish, and so forth. There's a good bunch of literature that's out there. I know I just bashed the internet not too long ago, but there are some really good sources on, how to take food that probably sounds very bland and not appetizing, and how to mix the flavors together. And all of a sudden, you're not adding any salt, you're not adding any additives, and the food tastes amazing. We
Doctor,
just had this conversation with a friend of mine who, was very much a pizza and burger kind of guy, and been trying to get him on the healthy bandwagon. And his wife made him a simple dish. She cut up some vegetables, mixed the flavors together, basically added very little seasoning, if anything, a little bit of pepper. And he said it was the most amazing dish he ever had, just because all the flavors merged together, which was amazing. So work your way around, keep it simple, and then build on it. You can always throw in a vegetable, a fruit, and some protein. It doesn't matter if it's animal protein. It doesn't matter if it's plant protein. I would just prefer that somebody would eat the correct amount of protein. You can overdo it, especially if you have chronic kidney disease. So definitely talk to your nephrologist about what is the appropriate amount of protein to eat. But a good, I guess, a good rule of thumb is, right about a gram per kilogram. So you take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, and that's how many grams of protein you should have divided up throughout the day. Simple as that. And again, plant, animal, doesn't matter. And then just start playing around with stuff. And then after you get more comfortable, you end up building on it.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let's talk about the DASH diet. And I know in a previous podcast you had talked about the DASH diet. Let's just talk about it for our listeners. I know they probably hear it a lot while they're reading books or researching on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the DASH diet is actually it's a very good diet. So what it was diet brought forth by the cardiology world to try to lower blood pressure and to prevent cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes, advanced heart failure, things like that. And what's really interesting about the DASH diet is that it doesn't ask you to really change what you want to eat. So if you want a burger, fine, but it gives you multiple suggestions on how to make that burger healthier. So instead of having this, substitute with this. Instead of having French fries, try having this. Where you still get that burger per se, but it's significantly healthier because you have all these, healthier choices. And what's very interesting about it is when they originally created it, they noticed that you can drop your blood pressure about 5 to 7 points. So 5 to 7 millimeters of mercury, or points, however you want to phrase it, which was amazing. It's basically the equivalent of a pill. So just by being on the DASH diet, you can theoretically eliminate a blood pressure pill, which is pretty cool. But they also noticed that it limited the amount of swelling that people developed. So they chalked it up to, it's portion control, low-fat diet, salt restriction, which are all relatively correct. But the magic of the DASH diet is using foods that have good sources of minerals and electrolytes and using those as your substitute for the unhealthy foods. And by including those extra nutrients into your body, you're causing your body to lose extra water weight, you're lowering your blood pressure, and you end up losing a little bit of fat weight with it too. So it's a fabulous concoction. And there's so many sources out there, and it's been out since the 90s. So, yes, there's cookbooks out there, and, I'm by far go for it, do your research. But you can also find some really good free information out there on the internet. If you just type in DASH diet, suggestions, DASH diet, meal choices, and you'll get a whole bunch of those popping up.
Yeah, that's great. From your clinical perspective, how does obesity specifically accelerate the progression of chronic kidney disease? And are there any misconceptions you often encounter about this relationship?
Yes. So obesity is a huge driver for chronic kidney disease. I feel many individuals patients, doctors tend to blame or tend to see them as separate entities. One does follow the other one. And Dr. Munir and Dr. Radani said some wonderful background info about it and what fat is. Body fat in general is an active tissue. So it's almost no different than the heart, the stomach, the intestines. It's a functioning tissue. So as any functioning tissue, it secretes hormones, it secretes chemicals, it secretes proteins, and so forth. And many of these can actually lead to a disruption in normal renal function. We have, when people have an excessive amount of obesity, their blood volume changes. So you end up having more blood in your body. Well, now a kidney, which is, a basic size, it doesn't grow beyond a certain amount, will end up having to do extra work to filter out all that blood. Well, it goes back to my analogy of taking a car and revving the RPMs all the way to the red line. You're going to blow out your engine. And that's what happens with the kidney. The kidney has to work so hard to filter all this blood in a certain amount of time that it's going to start burning out. Not to mention, since the organ is active and it secretes all these compounds, many of these compounds are pro-inflammatory, meaning they activate the immune system, and it's the immune system that ends up triggering all the damage that ends up happening into the kidney. So one of the hormones, leptin, which was looked at as maybe a hormone that you can, throw it into a pill and it stops you from being hungry, but that actually has been shown to promote scarring of the kidney. And a lot of other of these hormones that the fat triggers can also cause scarring of the kidney and can deposit fat within the kidney. And there's even evidence of lipotoxicity, meaning that the fat is actually toxic, where if you are obese, there are fat molecules floating through the blood. And when these get filtered by the cells in the kidney sucks up these fat droplets into the cells. Well, now what it's got to do something with that. So it tries to break it down, and by breaking it down, it releases breakdown products that end up damaging the cells. So it causes what we refer to as oxidative stress, and the main powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria, which basically gives us the energy, that we have, ends up becoming more and more dysfunctional. So there's quite a bit of damage that can happen to the kidney just by having that extra fat tissue on board. So it can cause a significant amount of damage. Not to mention, the kidney is going to be one of the first bystanders. 20% of the blood from each heartbeat is going to go to the kidney. So if you take a small piece of brain tissue, 8 grams, and a small piece of kidney tissue, 8 grams, how much or which organ do you think would have more blood flow? Most people would say the brain. And it does. It has quite a bit, almost about a liter a minute. It's about 700 and some change. The kidney will see about 11 liters per minute in that same amount of tissue. So the kidney is going to be beat up with all these inflammatory markers. It's just going to end up happening. There is actually a really good study that came out that was looking at what are some markers that we can use for that we can use as predictors of kidney disease, and will it cause kidney disease. So BMI, as we mentioned, has its drawbacks, because what if you're muscular? It kind of goes out the window. That's one of the main arguments. And it doesn't really assess how much fat you have. And there's many types of fat. There's fat that's under the skin. There's fat that's around the internal organs. And that visceral fat that's around the internal organs is probably the most damaging of all the fat. So 2 things that the study looked at was just waist circumference in general. The other one is weight to height ratio. So it looked at randomized controlled trials. So it looked at Deliver, Paragon, TopCat, Preserve, and it ended up, when they put all those studies together, they had about almost 17,000 participants in all those studies. So they crunched the numbers and they looked at what happens to the kidney as well as the heart, and when we have extra fat tissue. And what they found was that the BMI is not predictive. For each increased number of BMI, the change in your risk is negligible. So BMI, even though the numbers were high, the numbers were low, it didn't predict anything in terms of kidney disease or in terms of heart issues or heart failure per se. But waist circumference and weight height ratio did. So for every 10 centimeters of waist circumference increase, you had a 15% increased risk of developing kidney disease. And when you did your ratio of your weight to height, then for each 0.1 unit, so the weight to height ratio normally should be about 0.7-ish. 0.9 is where we're looking at, you're going to have, you're at very high risk, and that goes for men and women. But for every 0.1 increase, your risk of developing kidney disease as well as heart disease is 32%. So that's substantial. So waist circumference is now being looked at as being one of the biggest predictive markers of kidney disease and heart disease moving forward. And I'm excited to see what other data we're going to come up with in the upcoming months.
Very interesting study. Doctor, given your work in both interventional nephrology and patient education, how do you approach conversations with patients about weight management without overwhelming them, especially when they're already dealing with a CKD diagnosis?
So my approach is to go slow. As Dr. Udani mentioned in his 4-part podcast, much of the issues with obesity and the downstream effects don't happen overnight. They take time. So first things first is I ask the patient, we're going to go slow and we're going to slowly build. I lay out kind of the basics of what we're seeing, with that particular patient, if it's a weight issue, if we're already seeing kidney changes, heart changes, whatever. And then I ask, what is the hardest thing for you right now to work on? Because many patients, when you ask them, well, how would you go about losing weight? They'll know. Everyone knows how to do it. To an extent, everyone knows how to do it. It's the details that matter, and it's actually taking that first step. So I work with them and I try to explain to them how to take that first step to start developing a habit. That's what it comes down to. It's diets work, and then you hear these rebounds because no habit has been formed. So we take it slow. If they say that eating is their biggest hurdle, we focus on eating. If they're saying physical activity is their biggest hurdle, we focus on that. And we take it slow. We take it where we start building habits. For example, if walking recently has been in the news, and there's been some wonderful research on walking, that you can lose a substantial amount of weight just by walking. And there's these wonderful calculations based on this one study looking at how many calories you burn based on a typical walking pace, which on a treadmill is about 3.5. So you're just a regular pace. And turns out you don't even have to hit 10,000 steps to actually have adequate weight loss. So for them, if that's their hurdle, well, let's start slow. So, okay, you need to get moving. You're not feeling it today. How about you put on one shoe? Well, once you have one shoe on, that's kind of annoying. You might as well put the other shoe on. Well, now you got your shoes on, so, well, I might as well at least just stand up. So, okay, you stand up. And then you just take it that way. Walk to the door. How'd you feel? All right, well, I'm going to open the door. It's fresh air. It's really nice outside. I'm going to take a walk to my mailbox. You know, go take a walk to the mailbox. Well, now I'm already out here. Might as well just walk 3 houses. And then we just build on that. And then finally, after a while, it actually doesn't take very long. The average is about 66 days is what the literature says to build or to break a habit. So once we're in that groove and we're building and we're finally hitting a good steady state and they keep that up, now it's habitual. So now we got exercise, movement. So now we're going to move to the next step. What's next? Okay, what's your next hurdle? What to eat? Okay, and then we hack away at that. So that's how I approach it with patients. I think throwing everything at them all at once is just too much. It's too much. It's overwhelming. Anyone would just end up just shutting down and saying this is too difficult. So we hit their pain point and we go slow. That's how I approach it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think that's the right approach. For listeners who may be newly diagnosed with CKD and struggling with obesity, what's like one piece of advice or encouragement you'd want them to take away from today's conversation?
That obesity is not permanent. Especially nowadays, there's always a way to tackle it. At first, it was, and still the best, is lifestyle changes. And we talked about two of them, movement and diet. Whether it's DASH diet, whether it's coming up with your own, whether it's walking, or whether you like to play tennis or you like to go golfing, don't take a cart, walk after your ball. All of those are easy first steps. And those are the best steps to take to work on obesity, to manage obesity, and to get rid of obesity. The next step after that would be a little bit of help. So we're fortunate enough nowadays that we have had some incredible breakthroughs in medication. The TRIUMPH study, as was mentioned in the 4-part obesity series, Dr. Udani. We have great data on the SGLT2s, which are Jardiance and Farxiga. We have great data on the GLP-1s, which is Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. And that's that little bit of help. So if, that hurdle is too big or too daunting, well, there's always help out there. And that just supplements. It doesn't take over, but it supplements lifestyle changes. And it makes addressing those lifestyle changes easier. So there's always a way to tackle it. And it is not a permanent, like once you're obese, it's not that you're obese for the rest of your life. There are ways to do it.
Yeah, that's I think what people struggling with CKD need to hear, that there is a way to take control. So really good advice. Doctor, have you had experience helping somebody with changing their lifestyle, and that you've kind of helped shape the outcome of guiding them towards a better lifestyle?
Actually, I do. One instance that comes to mind is actually a close friend of mine. He has a strong family history of kidney disease, diabetes, and heart disease, and his, I guess, fallback was always eating. He used eating as his coping mechanism, and he ended up gaining a substantial amount of weight. I believe he topped out at 370 pounds at one point. So when we were talking, and I would always mention, I'm a little concerned, but he's like, I need to get better. I don't want to end up having all these health problems that my family does. And I said, okay, let's sit down. So we sat down, found his pain point, which was eating, and we just broke it down. We simplified it. We're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to move slow. You do this first, add this next, add this next. And he had a whole plan written out. And I believe after about 5-6 months, he was already down 67 pounds. And he was able to wear clothes he couldn't wear for, a very long time. And he was beyond excited. And he's still losing, which is great.
That's amazing. What a great story, and what a great contribution you made to helping him achieve that goal.
Thank you.
If someone wants to take better control of their health today, like right now, what's a small actionable step they can take that makes a real difference?
Walking, 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 walking. It is the easiest thing to do. You don't need any equipment. You don't need a gym membership. And everyone can walk, whether it's in your apartment, in your house, um, even individuals that are, struggling to maintain balance. We do have, patients who are, who do have other medical issues. A lot of times just being able to walk in their house and hold on to things. It's just that movement. Movement in general is huge. There is a study that looked at doing the bare minimum, and the bare minimum ended up being just under like 3,000 steps. And that's going to the bathroom, going to the kitchen, going to your bedroom, leaving your bedroom, things like that. And even that showed a decrease in mortality by 14%. And that's just by doing your daily activities. Imagine if you add to it. Now, as I said, we do have patients that have other, medical issues, and there's ways around that too. I am a big, big supporter of resistance bands. Um, Resistance bands offer you the ability to build muscle. You can have an aerobic exercise using resistance bands, and it doesn't harm your joints. So most people feel that, oh, if I'm going to exercise, I need to go to a gym. I need to lift weights. I need to do all that. Well, no, you don't. You can purchase a wonderful pair of resistance bands for very little. I've seen them go as cheap as $15 on certain websites. And start small. And you don't have to do much with it. But that movement in and of itself, you're activating the muscle. The muscle is going to start doing its work just like with walking, and you're still going to achieve your goal. So anyone can do it. So here's a nice little way to focus in on taking things slow and actually accomplishing what you want to accomplish. If you're laying down, sit up. If you're sitting up, just stand up. If you're standing up, just take a few steps. Kitchen, bathroom, doesn't matter. And now that you're taking a few steps, take it a little further. And then once you're in the groove, you might as well just keep going. That's how simple it is.
That's a great tip. Dr. Kowalski, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing so much insightful information on the topic of obesity and kidney disease. Our listeners were provided such invaluable information here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I do want to give a little shout out to NANI. NANI's been a wonderful organization, really pushing the health aspect to patients, focusing on their patients. So I definitely want to thank Dr. Tana and the NANI staff for allowing me to participate in this and allowing us to have these podcasts so patients can gain some insight and make some positive improvements.
Absolutely. And if you would like to listen to more great podcasts from Dr. Kowalski, please tune in to Spotify, where you will find so much helpful resources on those dealing with kidney disease. And thank you, Dr. Kowalski, for being here today. And I know we'll be back to share more great information.
Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Nephrology Today. We hope you tune in again real soon.